Hey, look at this story from the Times of Israel. Very interesting headline. It reads, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Egypt sign declaration calling for Hamas to disarm, end rule of Gaza at UN two-state confab. So basically, I mean, there's a lot in this, and I read the very lengthy document. There's some good stuff and some bad stuff. I mean, it's a UN document, but I think the news here, as you could see in the headline, is that some of the most powerful Arab Muslim countries are saying, Hamas, you got to go. Let me read a little bit from the story. Arab countries, including Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, and notice that Egypt borders Gaza, if you didn't know, have signed onto a statement calling for Hamas to disarm and end its rule of Gaza in a bid to end the devastating war in the Palestinian territory. 17 countries, plus the European Union and Arab League, are throwing their weight behind a 7-page text obtained by the Times of Israel, agreed at a United Nations conference on reviving the two-state solution for Israel and the Palestinians. So I'll just read a little bit from their declaration now. In the context of ending the war in Gaza, Hamas must end its rule in Gaza and hand over its weapons to the Palestinian Authority, with international engagement and support in line with the objective of a sovereign and independent Palestinian state, says the declaration. Now, I skimmed through the document. There are some terrible anti-Israel things in there too, for sure. But still, it couldn't be clearer. Hamas is no longer being protected, let alone championed, even by its very long-time hosts and funders, Qatar. I think that's an important change, and I think it's completely due to Donald Trump, by the way. Now, other countries signed on to this too, including France and the United Kingdom, who also call for a Palestinian state. So there's that. I mean, they basically want to reward Hamas for October 7th, but here they are saying Hamas must go. Of course, it really only matters what America says. Am I wrong? Here's Trump on the plane to the UK the other day talking about not rewarding Hamas, as he says Keir Starmer, the PM of Britain, is doing.
Is there any use at all in pressuring Israel now to come to some sort of longer-term solution?
Well, you could make the case that you're rewarding people, that, you're rewarding Hamas if you do that. And I don't think they should be rewarded. So I'm not in that camp, to be honest. We'll let you know where we are, but I am not in that camp.
Mr. President,
because if you do that, you really are rewarding Hamas. And I'm not about to do that.
But I think Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are getting a bit sick of things. I think they're actually becoming the real leaders in the Arab world. I mean, when you think of the capital city of Arabia, obviously it's dozens of countries, but obviously you think of Dubai. Maybe you think of Cairo, one of the largest cities in the world, but maybe just for its history and its size. But the future, the wealth, the excitement, the internationalism, Dubai is the way. Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, a very liberal country that has already made peace with Israel and that has a very, very strong program against Islamification, against radical Islam. By the way, here is Saudi Arabia, which is catching up to the UAE in that regard. Here's Saudi Arabia. This is a few years ago, but listen to this tough talk from their foreign minister.
And so the Qataris use their media platforms to spread hate. The Qataris send weapons to Al-Qaeda affiliated militias in Libya. The Qatari Emir was conniving with Gaddafi on how to overthrow Saudi Arabia. The Qataris connected Gaddafi with a Saudi dissident in London who they fund, who connected the Libyans with a group in Mecca with the objective of assassinating the then Crown Prince, later King of Saudi Arabia. Is this acceptable? In 2012, we cut off relations with them, the same countries. And a year later, they came back and agreed that they will end all of this nonsense. And they signed an agreement. And nothing happened. So this time, we said, you know what? We're not going to deal with you. Unless you change. This, we will not allow you. There's a list of terror finances that the US puts out, the UN puts out, And a number of them are living openly in Qatar, raising money and giving it to bad people. Is this acceptable? Shouldn't be. Why do the Qataris get away with it? Because I think people see a young country, young leadership, they buy fancy buildings, they have a nice airline, and they think, wow, these guys are really modern. But we have to deal with the dark side that I just explained.
So in a way, things are going well in the region. I mean, for Israel, it was a terrible massacre on October 7th, 2023, but militarily, they have rubbled their enemy, Hamas, and unfortunately, there are collateral damage to the citizens that Hamas hid underneath. They destroyed Hezbollah with that startling pager explosion that took out 2,500 senior military leaders of Hezbollah and took out the big boss there without a war. Syria, total regime change. And of course, Iran was deeply degraded in their military abilities, including their nukes. Things are different on the ground, but the problem is Israel, for just as much as it's winning the hard war, the hot war, the kinetic war, it's losing the propaganda war, terribly so. Here's an image that was on the front page of the New York Times and countless other media as well. A picture purporting to show a child who had been starved by those Israeli occupiers. But turns out that child actually was not suffering from starvation. The child had a rare and different chronic condition, nothing to do with the war, had actually been attended to by Israeli physicians, but Hamas knows propaganda and knows that Western media will publish anything. 55 million people saw the lie on the front page of the New York Times, at least that's how many people follow the New York Times main Twitter account. The Times printed this retraction and correction yesterday on a tiny Twitter account with just 89,000 followers. Why would they tell the defamatory lie to 55 million people, but just have their correction on an 89,000 person corporate account? Why would they do that? Because it wasn't a mistake. Of course, it's not a mistake any more than citing the Hamas figures for casualties. That's not a mistake. They know that Hamas is a propaganda organization, yet every single time they quote Hamas and show Hamas images as the truth. Well, here in Canada, I mean, no one really cares what our foreign minister says. I bet you'd have trouble naming our foreign minister. It's not Melanie Joly. It's Anita Anand. And here's her comments the other day.
And one that charts a path toward lasting regional peace and prosperity. As Article 1 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights states, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Canada remains firmly committed to a two-state solution, an independent, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state living side by side with Israel in peace and security. Canada supports the Palestinian people's right to self-determination, and we endorse the principle of Palestinian statehood. We shall continue to discuss with the Palestinian Authority the next steps in our relationship. A workable Palestinian state needs legitimate, democratic governance that serves all Palestinian people. Crucially important is the Palestinian Authority's commitment to undertake the comprehensive reforms necessary to govern Gaza and the West Bank. To that end, today, Canada is pledging an additional $10 million this year.
I don't think there's a single decision maker in the world who cares what Anita Anand has to say, except and other than Hamas itself, which has now sent 3 thank you letters to Canada's Liberals. That is so, so gross.
For the reasons I cited earlier, Canada intends to recognize the state of Palestine at the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly in September 2025. This intention is predicated on the Palestinian Authority's commitment to much-needed reforms, including commitments by the Palestinian Authority's President Abbas to fundamentally reform its governance, to hold general elections in 2026 in which Hamas can play no part, and to demilitarize the Palestinian state. Canada will increase its efforts in supporting strong democratic governance in Palestine and the contributions of its people to a more peaceful and hopeful future. I spoke today with President Abbas at length to reaffirm his commitments. Canada reiterates that Hamas must immediately release all hostages taken in the horrific terrorist attack of October 7th, that Hamas must disarm, and that Hamas must play no role in the future governance of Palestine. Canada will always steadfastly support Israel's existence as an independent state in the Middle East, living in peace and security. Any path to lasting peace for Israel also requires a viable and stable Palestinian state, and one that recognizes Israel's inalienable right to security and peace.